So welcome everyone. I'm so glad you joined us. This is the fifth talk in our winter speaker series. I'm Moira Yip, for those of you who don't know me. I'm on the program committee for the library, and I'm also on the board of the Greater Lovell Land Trust. And this is jointly sponsored by both organizations. You're going to be muted while Nick speaks, and then at the end, we will turn the muting off, and you can type questions into chat either during the talk or afterwards, or you can raise your hand at the end. So let me introduce Nick. Nick is a Falmouth native, and he's Maine Audubon's advocacy and outreach manager. And he's the author of several books, including the American Birding Association Field Guide to the Birds of Maine, and one with the title, The Ultimate Biography of Earth, which has to be the most ambitious book title ever. I haven't read this, but I'm very tempted to go out and get it after this talk. His topic today is entitled The State of Maine Birds, Decades of Change, and he's going to talk about how bird populations in Maine continually change in both directions and the causes of these shifting changes and so on. And I, for one, am really interested to hear this because we all have a sense that some species of birds, their populations are declining fast, and we worry about that. So, Nick, could you share your screen? And
I can share my screen. Hello, everybody. Can you see that right there?
Yes, I can. I'm going to mute myself now.
All right, we're doing it. Hi, everybody. It's me, Nick Lund from Maine Audubon. Thank you so much for having me out this evening. I wish I could be there in person to the beautiful library, maybe when all this mess blows over at some point in the future. But it's good to see you anyway, and this is an easy way to do it. So let's start talking about birds and how bird populations change. After I start with this contractually obligated slide here about Maine Audubon. Maine Audubon, for those of you who have not heard of us, we are the oldest and largest wildlife conservation organization in the state of Maine. We've been around, if you can believe it or not, since 1843, when we started as the Portland Society for Natural History. We have 10,000 members, 2,000 volunteers, 7 chapters, none really in the Lovell area. We have Borestone Mountain, which is way over near Monson, and then some more further south. We have chapters, including the Western Mountains chapter based out of Farmington, which I bet I'm sure covers Lovell. And we connect people to wildlife, right? So we have education programs. We teach thousands of school kids a year about Maine and Maine wildlife. We have scientists on staff doing conservation work, learning about how our populations of animals are doing. And then we have advocates on staff. I'm in the advocacy department. We take what we've learned from our scientists and we bring it to Augusta or DC to try to tell them what to do. So that's Maine Audubon, maineaudubon.org if you want to learn more. But today we are talking about bird populations over time, decades of change. Why are species range changing? Why are bird ranges changing? There are a lot of different reasons. Some are natural, some are human caused. Some bird species are growing, some are declining. What's happening in Maine and why is what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in. We're going to start with natural change. Okay, so these are the birds ranges that are changing naturally. So not really thought to be the product of human intervention. I should say too, first of all, 18,000 years ago, there were no birds in Maine, right? We were under an ice sheet. We were under glaciers. Lots of the country was. And as those glaciers have sort of naturally receded in the time before humans were, producing things to warm the planet, the birds range moved up into Maine. So as those glaciers receded, plant colonies followed them up, forests followed them up, and birds followed them along with it. So, I find it's worth remembering that sort of all the ranges in Maine are relatively new, relatively speaking, in the past 20,000 years or so. So that's one place to start. Another place to start is right here with this guy. One of the most beautiful birds in Maine. I'm not sure if any of you all see these around. They could be in Oxford County for sure, in the Western Mountains for sure. This is an evening grosbeak, stunning yellow-browed finch. They are called evening grosbeaks because people used to think that they only came out at dusk. just wrong. They were just wrong about that. That's not true, but I like to think it's because they look like a sunset. But evening grosbeak, it's a beautiful bird, and a bird that for a long time people thought was in real danger. I'm going to show some charts through this presentation. You know, you just basically know that lines go up and go down. Birds per party hour, you may see that a few times during a presentation. What that means is as there are more birders out there studying birds, we want to account for that greater number. So if you have one birder outside and he sees one bird, and then 10 birders out and they see 10 birds, that doesn't necessarily mean there are 10 times as many birds, or just more people seeing. So birds per party hour sort of compensates for that. But long story short, if you look down along the bottom, you can see that in the 60s and 70s and 80s, there were people seeing a lot more evening grosbeaks than after that. In the 90s and the 2000s, the populations really crashed, and people were very concerned. People didn't know exactly what was happening or why this crash occurred. It was occurring for some similar birds. Up in the top left there, that's a female evening grosbeak. The one to its right, going clockwise, is a bay breasted warbler, bay being a fancy birder word for a deep red color. A Tennessee warbler in the flowers, and then a Cape May warbler down below. All these birds were experiencing crashes, and people were scratching their heads. They couldn't figure out the cause until they started studying this little insect. So this guy is called a spruce budworm. Spruce budworm is it's a native pest of spruce trees. They occur in these large outbreaks. Every about 30 years or so, there'll be a large outbreak of spruce budworm across the spruce forest in Maine. What people started learning was that these outbreaks of spruce budworm line up almost directly with population increases of certain bird species. So right here, if you look in this chart, you can see the major outbreaks occurring between 1970 and 80. That actually lines up pretty perfectly with the large increase in these birds in the 70s and 80s. And so what scientists started understanding is that all these birds, and most all birds in Maine in the summertime, they eat insects, they eat caterpillars. Caterpillars are by far the most important food source for growing birds of all kinds. 99% of terrestrial birds feed insects to their kids, their fledglings, even if they don't eat insects at other times of the year. And so all of a sudden, every 30 years, there were tons of these caterpillars on the landscape. And what that did was result in a big boom of certain bird populations. And so what folks determined was that this 70s and 80s boost in evening grosbeak populations was actually a bit of an abnormality itself. What we weren't seeing was a steep decline in population. We were seeing a sort of return to normal for the evening grosbeak population based on spruce budworm outbreaks. So that was really interesting and pretty relieving. And the connection was sort of further solidified because there is actually a bit of a spruce budworm outbreak going on right now in the past decade or so. And we've seen a correlation between those species we were worried about and their populations going up as the spruce budworm came. So all you need to know about these charts is basically the purple one is the most recent. So bay breasted warbler, one of those ones that people are concerned about, big spikes in population. Tennessee warbler, spikes in population. And Cape May warbler, spikes in population. So that it tracks almost exactly with spruce budworm outbreaks, the rising populations of these birds. The implications of this are really interesting because spruce budworm is loved by these birds that feed them to their babies. It is not loved by the timber industry. The timber industry works very hard to try to tamp down on spruce budworm infestations because they can kill spruce trees, which are important for that industry. That picture below of that airplane, that's DDT coming out of that plane. This is one of the insecticides they used to spray for budworm. That'll come up a little bit later. So now that we know that these insects are actually beneficial to birds and part of the natural cycle, we can help inform some of the management strategies for spruce budworm that are out there. It's an important new factor in the management. And for those folks who are concerned, we still have big years of evening grosbeaks. This past winter, so the winter of 20 to 21, was this incredible, famous flight of evening grosbeaks, and you may have had them at your feeders. I know I had them at mine down in Cumberland. So the long story short is that evening grosbeaks and some of those other boreal birds, they're doing okay. All right, that is all of the naturally occurring range changes. The rest are all because of humans. And so I break the human-caused range changes down into a couple different categories. The first one is land use and habitat loss. So as humans have come across and we've changed the way the landscape looks and is used, bird ranges change with it. Some of them are this stunning raptor here, an American kestrel. I say, I realize as I do these presentations that every bird I say is the most beautiful bird, I'm realizing. Kestrel is up there too. What a gorgeous, you don't get this close to them often, but that beautiful coloring down there. There's this beautiful iridescent green bird. This is a tree swallow, an aerial insectivore zipping low over the fields to try to pick insects out of midair. And then this funky blackbird. This is called a bobolink, after its very odd and endearing call. It's got that cool yellow cap. What do all these three birds have in common? A couple things. One is that they are declining. This here is a graph showing American kestrel, that first bird that we saw. Its population in Maine, average over breeding bird survey routes. And you can see that they are in a steep decline since the 70s. It's a same story for the others. To put it in perspective a little bit more, the way that states keep track of their bird populations is that they do these big breeding bird atlases every couple decades. Maine is almost finished with our latest one. Our previous one was in the early 80s, and we are just wrapping up our breeding bird atlas right now, so we don't have all the data yet, but we do have some data from Massachusetts, which is similar in many respects to Maine. And so we can look at their data to give us a sense of how ours might go. This is the Massachusetts bird atlas page for the American kestrel. A white triangle means an increasing population, a black dot means a stable population, and a red triangle means a decreasing population. You can see that American kestrels have, without exception, declined around Massachusetts. And so we expect a similar situation in Maine. Same thing for tree swallows and bobolink, both of these species experiencing some steep declines. What is going on? Well, it has to do with another thing these birds have in common, which is they are all open country birds. These are birds that you often see around farm fields or long grass sort of meadows and things. And those are habitats that are disappearing quickly in Maine. Here is another chart to illustrate that. This is a chart of the amount of farms and farmland in the state of Maine. The line there is the percentage of the state, which is agricultural land, farmland. And you can see that it peaked in 1880 or so at 30% of the entire state of Maine was farmland. That if you think about that, this is a big forested state. 30% of that was farmland in 1880. Now it's about 5%, 5 or 6%. So that's about 6 million acres of Maine was once great habitat for these birds and is now no longer great habitat. Is that something to be concerned about? You could argue that if the farms are reverting to forest, then you're sort of, it's sort of a wash for biodiversity, because if you may lose the habitat for the grassland birds, but you're gaining habitat for forest birds. The problem is that that's not necessarily what's happening. At least 1 million acres has been converted from agricultural land into developed land, which is not something that sustains biodiversity in the way that we want it to. You can see here, as humans come along and plant non-native trees or mow lawns or get rid of trees altogether, that's not habitat for any birds. And so the declines in these grassland species that we're seeing are really tied to this increase in developed land. All right, moving on to another land use change. I'm going to play a little video here. Tell me when you can see the bird. There he goes. There he goes. This is a piping plover. These are two piping plovers. The piping of their name refers to those black lines on their forehead, which, as you can see, matches almost perfectly to that dried seaweed that they like to nest in. These birds are incredibly well camouflaged for beaches and the sort of dried seaweed rack lines that they're on. They've evolved to live and nest on beaches. They nest right out in the open, right on the sand, which is right next to their food source. You know, they pick little invertebrates out of the sand and the beach, and this is where they've chosen to live. Good for them. It's a great place to be. We all love going to the beach, but that's sort of the problem, right? The human use of the beach has really encroached on the habitat of beach nesting birds, so much that it's very difficult for them to nest here. I should just post this little picture. This cute little nugget is one of the birds that they're protecting here. This little guy spends its whole life growing up right on the beach. Just another beach nesting bird here. This is a least tern. We have a number of tern species that live in Maine. This is the smallest, the least tern. These birds are not doing well. As humans use the beaches more, just visiting them, as they run their dogs on their beaches, as they drive on the beaches, as they cause beaches to erode during different ways with seawalls and things. Beaches were a very tough place to live. And both of these species, piping plover and least terns, were nearly extirpated from the state of Maine. But until we came along and helped, right? So I sort of spoiled this slide a little early. One of the main themes here, one of the main themes in this presentation, and one of the main themes for conservation overall, is that we can fix it. We can fix it. Any of the environmental problems that we cause, if we can recognize what we're doing, stop what we're doing, and fix what we're doing, or fix what we've done, species come back, right? They're supposed to be here. They're meant to be here. They want to come back if humans just get out of our own way. So one of the things we'll see in this piece here is humans can fix the damage we've caused if we just do it. In the early 80s, Maine Audubon and our state and federal partners got together to start protecting piping plovers and least terns. And guess what? We're doing it. You can see down there that there were fewer than 10 pairs, nesting pairs of piping plover in the entire state in the 80s. We have a robust coastal birds program where we go and identify piping plover nests on the beaches, and we put little fencing around it that the birds can get in and out, but cats and other predators can't get in. We try to work with towns to make sure they're not, driving on beaches during the right seasons and things like that. We work to keep dogs leashed on beaches, and it works. These birds are coming back. We, for the past bunch of years, look at that red line cruising up. That's the number of birds fledged. That's growth. This year, 2021, we had another record year with 125 pairs and 215 fledged chicks. That is off this chart. This chart only goes up to, well, I guess it's 125 pairs, and the number of chicks is way higher than that. So tremendous success because we've put some effort into it. Same thing with least terns. Least terns are actually more susceptible to widespread damages. That's why you see some of those sharp ups and downs. They nest colonially, they nest all together. And so there sometimes is a cat that'll get in and kill a whole ton of eggs, or a fox that'll get in. And so they are sort of susceptible to damage, but the overall trend is up, and we're very proud of that. All right. Another habitat change, a couple more species here. This guy, we all know the northern cardinal, one of our most familiar backyard birds. Did you know that in Maine, they were almost unheard of in the 1960s? Not that long ago. There were almost no cardinals in the entire state of Maine. Here's a little graph showing that. Look at that, 60s, 70s, 80s, very low numbers of cardinals, way up now. So obviously, I'm sure, a lot of you have cardinals in your backyard. I've got them in my backyard. They're way up. Similarly, this cute guy, Eastern bluebird, always been a summer breeding bird here in Maine, but only recently has become an overwintering resident. Here's a chart showing that. And this is going to be really recent. This is only like 15 years ago that these birds started staying in large numbers over the winter. What is going on? What is happening? Well, we are planting food for them. So migration it's a little bit of a different story for the cardinal and the bluebird, but what it comes down to is that humans are planting plants that they like. For cardinals, they love dense shrubs, and that's exactly what a lot of people have in their backyards. That's not necessarily a naturally occurring habitat type in Maine, especially on the scale that we have, but humans come along and plant arborvitae and all kinds of dense shrubberies in the backyards. That is perfect cardinal habitat, and that is facilitating their arrival north. For bluebirds, it's because they figured out that they can eat berries, and that we're planting berries on a whole bunch of ornamental trees and some naturally occurring trees that allow them to forego migration. Migration is a dangerous business. It takes a lot of effort. It's dangerous to fly that far. It's much easier to stay put if you can. And bluebirds, because humans have planted exotic species like barberry and bittersweet, multiflora rose and autumn olive and Russian olive. There are more berries and other types of food around throughout the winter than there used to be. And so bluebirds are sticking around. I have a gang of 20 bluebirds that sort of rocks around my neighborhood all the time. So that's another, as humans come and plant plants in our sort of suburban or built environment, those plants are food and shelter for species that may not have made it up before. All right, one more sort of, I just find this such a fascinating story. This is a sort of a combination natural and human-assisted range expansion. This bird is a cattle egret. It's a little white egret. If you that sort of walks around in the breeding season, they have this beautiful orange breeding feathers. They are not native to the North and South America. They are native to Africa and Europe. They sort of migrate between Africa and Europe. And sometimes, as happens with all bird species, sometimes they sort of go the wrong way. So sometimes cattle egrets would just fly accidentally across the Atlantic and end up in South America. In Africa, their sort of ecological niche is to follow large mammals. So they sort of evolved to follow elephants and rhinos and things and eat the insects that those animals kicked up when they walked through the grass. Those large animals didn't exist naturally in South America. And so for eons, if cattle egrets showed up accidentally in South America, they would sort of be up creek, as we say. But something changed in the early 1900s where they showed up in South America, and all of a sudden there were large mammal there. There were cattle there. Humans brought cattle and agricultural lands down to South America. And when these accidental cattle egrets showed up, they had food all of a sudden. They had large mammals to walk behind. And so starting about the 1930s, cattle egrets landed in South America and persisted and expanded. And this map shows the expansion of cattle egrets throughout the country. So they started in the 1930s in South America and have moved steadily into the 2000s into North America. And they're now found, they're still very rare in Maine, but they are very common in places like Florida and the South. And it's because they sort of got a toehold in because of human behavior. All right, so I like to end these sections with a what can you do thing. What can you do to improve land use and habitat loss? The best thing to do is plant native plants. Plant native plants. Native plants host native insects, which are, as I said, the #1 food source for baby birds. They're easy to grow because they are used to the climate and soils here in Maine, and they support a whole ton more wildlife than exotic plants or non-native plants. So there are lots of ways you can find native plants. MaineNativePlants.org is one that Maine Audubon is involved with, which can help you figure out exactly what plants to get for your yard. And that's the way to combat losing habitat otherwise, or humans coming into developing things. All right, so the next category is direct interaction from humans. You'll see what this means as we sort of get into it. But one species that has been directly impacted by us is this mystery bird. Anybody know what this is? Of course, wild turkey. Wild turkey, believe it or not that long ago was extremely rare in Maine because we shot them all, basically. That's what it comes down to. We all know that turkeys are a food source, and for many years they were just hunted without regulation or concern. And because of that, nearly extirpated in Maine, if not completely extirpated from Maine. Turkeys have lived here for eons, but we hunted them all out in a couple hundred years. But like I said before, once we recognize our behavior and change our behavior, the species can come back, right? In this case, we recognize that we can't just have open hunting seasons all year round, and we should regulate ourselves and be more conscientious about how we hunt. That's resulted in this. So these two images, I mentioned earlier that there's the Maine's Breeding Bird Atlas from the 1980s. That's this very DIY looking map on the left side. The black dots are places that they were turkeys in 1980. A couple black dots, the ones down in York County, they may have been natural. The ones in the mid-coast, those were part of a reintroduction effort. But that's it. No other turkeys were seen on that atlas in the whole state of Maine. On the other map is all the blue dots are sightings from 2020, I believe it was. And I don't need to tell you, there are turkeys everywhere, right? Turkeys are doing great. There are turkeys in Aroostook County, there are turkeys in Washington County, there are turkeys in Baxter State Park. Turkeys are supposed to be here. And once humans have controlled ourselves and let them come back, they came back, and they came back strong. So, it's another conservation win that happened, thankfully, just in the nick of time before turkeys went completely extinct. And now turkeys are thriving again. They are actually doing better than any other recovering species. So this slide, and there are some spoilers on here too, but this is from the Massachusetts Atlas again, shows species which had increased the most since the previous atlas, and basically increased the most in the past 30 years. In Massachusetts, that was wild turkey, and I suspect that Maine's Breeding Bird Atlas will show the same thing. We're going to be talking about some of these other species later. What's another one? Of course, bald eagle. Direct interaction from bald eagles. There were 21 pairs of bald eagles in the entire state of Maine. 22 million acres of Maine. There were 21 pairs in 1967. Of course, as he said before, rearing its ugly head was DDT. Famous Mainer, part-time Mainer, famous Mainer, Rachel Carson, discovered and publicized the link between DDT and many different injuries, including large raptor declines. DDT had the effect of bioaccumulating in the bodies of raptors and ospreys, and caused their shells to be extremely brittle and weak. So when the birds would try to incubate the shells, they would just crack the eggs, which is just a terrible situation. So she publicized in Silent Spring the link between DDT and all these terrible environmental issues. And thankfully, believe it or not, people woke up. People said, we can't allow this anymore. We can't have 21 bald eagles in the entire state. It's the dang national bird. This is a symbol of our country. We can't kill them off. And we banned DDT. And guess what? Eagles came back, right? Eagles came powering back. There were 21, as I said, nesting pairs in 1967. In 2018, there were 737 nesting pairs. So what is that? 50 years, 737 from 21. It's an incredible recovery. The story I like to tell is I started it at Maine Audubon in 2018. That was the 50th anniversary of a trip that we do up Merrymeeting Bay looking for bald eagles. That trip started in 1969, and the goal was just to see one eagle, just to see an eagle, and they did. They saw one eagle on that trip. When we ran that 50th anniversary trip, we did the same route up the same stretch of river and saw 49 bald eagles on that same stretch of river. So this is what happens. Again, when humans get out of our own way, we recognize the harm that we're causing and we stop it, the birds will come back. All right. Loons. How are loons doing? Another beloved icon in Maine. I'm sure you have a ton of awesome loons on Keezer Lake and anywhere up in Oxford County, big time loon paradise. In the early 80s, Maine Audubon again said, look, everybody loves loons. We don't know how they're doing. Are they doing good? Is there a threat to them? And so we started a program that folks may be involved with here called the Loon Count, which goes out and counts loons every year to see how their numbers are doing, if they going up or going down. We also got into a partnership with Tufts Veterinary School to do necropsies on loons, to try to figure out why they were dying. And the leading cause of death we discovered was lead poisoning. Lead poisoning. How are loons getting lead into their body? Let me tell you how. Loons don't have teeth, right? So loons, like all birds, swallow their, well, not all birds, I guess, but when they catch a fish, they swallow it whole. They're not cutting it up with a fork and knife. They are swallowing the whole thing whole. But you can't just eat that way. You have to grind it up somehow. You have to chew. And so what loons do is they go to the bottom of the lake, they get stones from the bottom and they swallow the stones. The stones go into a part of an organ called the gizzard. And the gizzard, the food passes through there and the stones sort of crush up the food. They're basically chewing the food inside their body. So they have this little packet of stones in there that does the chewing for them. What the scientists were finding was that there were bits of lead fishing tackle in their gizzards. So these birds were going to the bottom and accidentally swallowing lead sinkers and jigs that had fallen to the bottom of the lake and were ingesting lead that way. And just to give you a sense of how easy it would be or how difficult it would be if you're a loon, here's all the lead that's in this picture. So here, this is a picture of stones without any swirling sediment, without any water in the way. And if we can't see where the lead is in this picture, how is a loon who doesn't even know what lead is supposed to know to avoid it? And so this is how loons were dying in Maine. This was the major threat to loons for the longest time. Maine Audubon has worked with some other, with the state to help pass legislation banning the sale of bare lead sinkers and jigs. We have some more work to do, but getting the word out, especially among fishermen, about the dangers of using lead fishing tackle has really helped. And in our study, in the loon count, we've seen the number of loons in the state of Maine increase, almost double in that time. Other threats to loons include washouts from boats. So if boats produce too much wake near a loon nest, loons, because they can barely walk at all because they are so good at swimming, they sort of gave up evolutionarily the ability to walk. They nest right on the edge of the water, which means that they're very susceptible to waves crashing over their nests. So we worked with a lot of lake associations and other groups to put in no wake laws and signs and things on lakes, and it's working. It's really working. Loons are doing really well in the state of Maine. All right, here's kind of a cool one, direct interaction. These are two of Maine's seagull species. On the left, we have the herring gull, and on the right, we have the great black-backed gull, the largest gull species in the world. Did you know that at one point, both of these birds were some of the most endangered birds in Maine? Gulls, a couple hundred, 100 years ago, were decimated. Their eggs were taken by people who wanted to eat their eggs, picked off the colonies. Their feathers were used for hat decoration, and there were very few gulls in Maine around the turn of the century. That all changed because of some direct human interaction. We had open pit landfills, and we had fishing wharfs which produced tons of discarded food for gulls to eat. So, a lot of us who grew up in the middle part of the century think of gulls as just, we're used to seeing swarms of gulls all the time. Those are actually very inflated numbers, artificially inflated, you could say, because of humans producing a whole ton of extra food that they didn't have before. So gulls, herring gulls, and black-backed gulls went from very rare in Maine to more abundant than they ever had been before. As humans are now capping our landfills, and as we are sort of tamping down on fish processing at wharfs, the gull populations are actually declining fairly steadily. Not in a way that is concerning, but in a way that perhaps is adjusting to what is a traditionally sort of natural number. So just an interesting up and down when we talk about gull populations. Here's a really cool one. Do people have these at their feeders? These are house finches. Yeah, Moira has them. These are house finches. Very similar to the purple finches of our sort of northern forests, but typically a species that didn't live in Maine. So house species are introduced and fairly newly introduced to the state. They've been here less than 100 years. What happened? Well, it's kind of a funny story. These birds are native to the southwestern United States, and some enterprising people used to capture them from California and bring them to the East Coast to sell in pet stores. They would call them Hollywood finches, flashy name. When the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was passed in the early part of the 1900s, it prohibited the ownership and sale of native birds. So all these pet store folks said, I got all these birds out here. So they just opened up the cages and let them go. And house sparrows said, all right, I'll just live over here now. And now they have completely colonized this part of the country. It's a pretty funny range map, because what you have is on the western part of the US and down to Mexico, you have what is sort of the long-term native range of house finches. And then starting in the east and now moving, so it's almost touching the western range, you have this incredible expansion of house finches from the East Coast. So I have them every day out here. They're a very common bird now. They are adaptable and can live on a variety of food sources, and but they are not technically a species native to Maine. There's a similar story to this bird here. It looks like a mourning dove, but it's a little bit different. This is called a Eurasian collared dove. Collared because of that little black collar on its neck. Native to Europe and Asia, as as you gather from the name, Eurasian collared dove, but now is very common in much of the United States. How did this one happen? This one is crazy. Again, this was a bird that was kept in pet stores, primarily in Florida. And because they're not native to the United States, this is one of the birds you could keep and sell as pets. Kept in Florida. Florida, of course, the site of some natural disasters. There were some hurricanes that struck Florida in the 1980s, which basically let a bunch of these collared doves go free. And they have spent the past 30 years just taken over the United States. Let me show you what that sort of looks like here. So this here is an eBird map of Eurasian collared dove. And what we're going to be looking at is the color purple. The purple indicates the presence of collared doves. You'll see a bunch down here in Florida. This is where there were probably some escaped birds and maybe some established birds back in the 80s. There are a couple scattered purple dots around. That's pet store escapees, one-offs. But let's see what happens as I go forward in time a little bit. This is as recent as 1988. Go 91. See a little more purple in Florida. 93, 96, 99. Look at Florida is bright purple now. 2002, 2005, 2008, 2011, and present day. So in 30 years, this species has basically conquered all the way up to Alaska from there. They are a very common bird in urban settings all throughout the country, except really the East Coast. We don't really know why they've sort of gone so far west and not really come to Maine or further up the East Coast. There's plenty of mourning doves here and plenty of similar species, so not really sure. But they are coming. This is Maine's first record of Eurasian calla dove. This is 2013 in Falmouth. My buddy Doug likes to needle me with this photo because he took it, he saw this bird, and I haven't seen one. But this is a bird we expect to see more of in the future in Maine. Another one we expect to see some more of is our vultures. There are two species of, well, there are three, California condor being the third, but turkey vulture and black vulture. So these are both of those species. The turkey vulture, of course, is this one here. Got the red turkey head. It's got the silver feathers on the trailing edge of the wing. So black in the front and silver on the back. The black vulture here has got broader wings, a black head, and it has silver sort of jazz hands at the end. It's got sort of silver hands at the tips of its wings and black all through. They are a bird that we are going to expect to see more of very soon in Maine. They are on the way. Here's a map of black vultures, and they basically made it to New York. There's a few records in Maine, but not many. They're following a similar pattern as turkey vultures, actually. Turkey vultures, which are very common in Maine, especially in the summer, are actually new residents themselves. Their first record of turkey vultures breeding in Maine was just 1982 in Camden. What's the direct interaction here? It's roads, basically. As Maine's road system has expanded, we have a lot more roadkill for turkeys to eat, turkey vultures to eat. Turkey vultures came up first and black vultures are following behind. So that's the direct interaction here. All right, the last of the man-made change categories is climate change. Humans are causing the planet to warm and species are adjusting accordingly. The sort of poster child perhaps in Maine is this bird here. This is a species that is not named very well. It's sort of famously got a bad name. This is the Red Bellied Woodpecker. If you can see here, if you look sort of between his legs, you can see the little bit of a red belly. This name dates back to where humans used to shoot birds a lot. And if you held this bird in your hand, you would see that it has a red belly. This is a bird thought of classically as a southeastern species. This bird is extremely common in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and further places further south. But it is increasing in Maine quite drastically. I have them here through the winter here in Cumberland. This is a map just showing from the early 2000s, red bellied woodpeckers. The blue line is New Hampshire, the red line is Maine, a clear increase. I don't really know what accounts for the sharp up and down of the line in Maine, especially, don't know, but the overall trend is certainly up. And if you ask old timers, they never used to see red bellied woodpeckers, and now you can see them anytime you want. How do we know this is linked to climate change? So there is a scientific rule we can use to show how climate change is sort of the culprit here. It's called Bergmann's rule. Bergmann's rule is a rule in biology which holds that where there is a species that has a broad latitude, range of broad latitude. So say a bird that lives in Florida and in Maine, the ones that live further north are bigger than the ones that live further south. So for example, black bear, it holds to all species. There are black bears that live in Maine, there are black bears that live in Florida. On average, the black bears in Maine are bigger than the ones in Florida. And that's because of the climate, right? That they need to be bigger here. It's more beneficial to be a little bit trimmer down south and bulkier up north. And so the rule holds that species further south, individuals of that species are smaller than up north. That held perfectly true for red-bellied woodpeckers. Back in the 1950s, when the northern border of the red-bellied range was in Pennsylvania, those birds were the biggest red-bellied woodpeckers. Ones further south were smaller. As the range has moved northward, now the ones that live in Maine are the biggest red-bellied woodpeckers. And crucially, the ones in Pennsylvania are smaller. So we can see the natural sort of extending of the population and the body size trends following right along with a warming climate. And we don't need fancy scientists to know, we don't need rules to understand that southern species are coming up, right? Red-bellied woodpecker, Carolina wrens are very common in Maine. I have them in my backyard too all year. Black sea bass, smooth mud crab, seahorses, creatures that people never used to find in the Gulf of Maine or in Maine are being found there now, southern species. It's as simple as that. This has some dire consequences for birds, as you probably know. National Audubon Society a couple of years ago did a very eye-opening report where they modeled habitat under different climate scenarios to figure out where birds would change in the different scenarios. We know this stuff very well. We know where certain species live. We know where they don't live. We know which which habitats or ecosystems exist in certain temperatures. And so we can predict if this area is now going to be this temperature, what habitats will live there, and therefore what birds will live in those habitats. It's fairly straightforward. The results can be distressing. These are some maps pulled out of that climate report, modeling three things. So modeling the current temperature, which is the map on the far left, a 1.5 degree increase in warming temperatures in the middle by 2050, I think, or 2080 rather, and then a 3 degree warming by 2080 on the far right. Orange is habitat as it exists now, or the range of those birds where it exists now. Red means a loss of habitat, and blue means an increased habitat. So you can see that within a degree and a half of warming, there basically won't be breeding loons in southern Maine anymore. If we get to 3 degrees by 2080, we basically won't have the temperatures that loons need. We are on already the southern edge of common loon breeding range right now. And so as the temperatures increase, our habitat in Maine will simply be not to their liking any longer. They will have room to move up. There will be forests that move up. And so, loons on a whole may be able to migrate, but we likely won't have them in Maine anymore. Same with bobolinks, those grassland birds I mentioned before, sort of a tight band of bobolink habitat across, Maine and this latitude. A degree and a half, we're going to lose a lot of their habitat in the southern part. 3 degrees, basically a complete shift northward for these birds. We talk about some of these birds will be able to shift northward. What that means, that's good for them, but it means that there are plenty of species that have nowhere to shift, nowhere to go, right? So tundra breeding species, which includes a whole lot of waterfowl, a whole lot of shorebirds, things like longspurs and snowy owls, they basically are at the top. And so those species, they face the most dire threat from like a sort of a ecosystems moving northward, because they are already as north as you can go. And so, we can talk about this from the Maine perspective, which means a lot of our common species won't exist anymore here. But we can also talk about it from a sort of worldwide perspective, which means that a lot of birds may have nowhere to go. This sort of goes both ways. Some birds will increase in Maine. The wood thrush is one of them, predicted to increase. So right now we're sort of on the northern edge of wood thrush habitat in Maine. They're not super common around here. As things warm up, you can see on that map to the farthest right that some of their southern habitat will become, and some of their sort of lowest lying habitat will become not to their liking any longer. But some of the habitat in Maine, especially as our Arboreal Forest is predicted to migrate northward, sort of the eastern forest will move up there, and that's better habitat for wood thrush. So some species will increase. So climate change really it's not a everything dies scenario, it's a shifting ecosystem scenario. in all that means. That will benefit some species potentially, and will certainly harm others. There's sort of an overall summary in that Audubon report about which species are most vulnerable in Maine and which may benefit. The Arboreal Forest, so basically the northern half of Maine, starting just above, northern Oxford County, up the mountains, some boreal woods up there. We're the southern edge of the boreal habitat in the country, this part of the country. And so as that creeps northward, the birds that live there, meaning Canada jays, boreal chickadees, black-backed woodpeckers, they're going to have to follow that forest out of Maine. Certain birds will increase. Generalist birds, like birds that live in developed areas or human habitat, will do fine. Eastern forest birds, lots of warblers. There's sort of a mixed bag there. Water birds may be all right in Maine because the winters will be warmer here. So it's not always good or bad, as simple as that, but it is a complicated picture, and certainly it means change. That's only if we let it get to that point, right? And I'm gonna, I'll get some questions after this, but like we've done for bald eagles, like we did for loons, like we did for piping plovers, we're not scared of this stuff. The younger generations think of this as a conservation issue, just like every conservation issue that the previous generations have fixed. If you go back to the 1960s, the water in the Androscoggin River, you couldn't even look at it without gagging. Now there's fish all up there. We've taken dams down. We fixed a lot of our problems. We can fix climate change too. We know exactly what we need to do. We just have to do it. And so these scenarios don't have to come true at all. We can protect the species we have and keep Maine the way we like it. So thank you very much. That is the species. And I want to make sure that to leave time for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. That was really fascinating. At least I thought it was wonderful. We're going to take lots of questions, but I'm going to use my prerogative to get one in first. There was one thing you didn't mention that I've read a lot about, and I'm curious as to your take on what it means for Maine, which is the decline in insect populations worldwide. Could you just talk about that a little bit, and then we'll take questions from everybody?
Sure. There's a tremendous decrease in insect populations. That's the fundamental piece of it. Whether it's due to a lot of different causes, increasing temperature is one of them. And I should sort of preface this by saying scientists for a long time didn't study insect biomass. It was sort of anecdotal in terms of, I used to drive down the highway, or I would drive down a country road and my windshield would be smattered with insects. And now when I do that, there's no insects. There isn't great science on how many insects are in a particular place. And so we're in sort of an interesting time where we anecdotally know, and in some ways certainly know, but don't exactly know what we're losing, but we know what we're losing. So, insects are very sensitive to temperature in a lot of different ways, very sensitive to climatic changes. And so coupling that with pesticide use and different chemicals, and also the introduction of non-native plants, which which have natural defenses that they develop somewhere else, which our native insects can't get around. Insects are in incredible decline, and that has impacts for about every species. Like I said, I think 99% of terrestrial birds need insects to feed their babies. And so if we don't have insects, then you just simply aren't going to have food for baby birds. So that's why Maine Audubon strongly encourages the planting of native plants. We know exactly how many caterpillar species nest on, can use each oak or black cherry or et cetera. And that's the best way to get these back. These aren't, pest insects. They're beautiful butterflies or moths that you never see, but to a bird, it is a vital source of food. And so while we work to also, stop climate change to the extent we can and reduce pesticide use to the extent we can, planting native plants is the best way to support insect populations.
Thank you. So we can take questions from anyone now. I can't see most of you because you've got your videos and your sound off, but you can turn anything back on now. And if you have a question for Nick, you can either wave your hand in the air or you can put it into the chat. And I've got 2 screens worth of you to look at, so I have to keep going.
I got one down here from the Boros family about when to take your feeders down in the summer because of
there you go.
bears.
Good. Well spotted.
I don't have bears where I live, and so I would say take them down before you get bears. Bears will come out in March or so, I guess, and so I would have them down then. Feeders are much less important in the at least seed feeders are much less important in the summer than in the winter. A lot of the birds that are coming back in the summer don't eat seeds, and all birds mostly are looking for insects. So if you want to have a better feeder experience in the summer, you could do something other than seed. My favorite thing to do is, and this depends on sort of the habitat type around your house, but I cut some oranges open and I hang them sort of this side up, and that's a favorite food of Orioles. And there's a few things more exciting than having Orioles at your feeder. I don't know if a bear is going to eat an orange, but that's one you could try. Hummingbird feeders, bears might like. I don't know what bears want. Don't get bears, but there are other things besides seeds that you could do to do in the summer. Otherwise, I would think about late March probably to take them down.
Okay, very good question. I'm just going through the chat to see if there's anything here that I missed. Now, most of these are informative but not questions. And I'm looking at my screen to see for hands in the air. But
did anybody see the Stellar Sea Eagle on this? I was watching here. Following that story? No.
I've been following it, and we have a naturalist here in town, Mary Jewett, who I don't think is on this, who did go down and see it, and she wrote a piece for our local Bridgeton News newspaper about seeing it. So that was great. Did you see it?
I did. I saw it on December 31st. And I had hoped to see it again, but nobody knows where it is.
It seems to have disappeared, I gather.
It has just not been seen since it's. I'm sorry to Ann Patterson, who has not seen it. He tried to go on the 26th, 2 days after it was gone. It likely won't come to Oxford County. It's a coastal bird that loves rivers, but you never know. Keep your eyes on it. If you have open water in the lakes still? Probably not, right?
There's some open water on the old Saco, but it's a very small area. It's not really Stellar Sea Eagle kind of open water, I don't think.
Yeah, they go where bald eagles go, we think. It goes wherever the heck it wants is where it goes.
The lake is pretty frozen at the moment. Won't be open for a while.
Right,
I don't know if you saw in the chat earlier on that we did have a cattle egret here last week in Freiburg Harbor.
That's right. I heard about that.
I saw it and I put it in eBird. So there you go.
Good job.
In breeding plumage.
I heard about that. They are, hey, Renee.
Renee, we have a hand. Renee.
It's actually Irene, but my family calls me Reenie.
Okay.
We've had a switch in our bird feeders that very few chickadees and hordes of juncos.
This year.
And you're wondering what's up?
Yeah. Very few chickadees.
When did that happen?
Every day.
Okay.
We've got juncos, maybe 12 of them at a time on the ground where we only had a few before. And not many chickadees.
Linda, I'm gonna mute you because I think we're getting some feedback from there for a second. And so juncos are a very cool species. They are a migrant, but they are what we call an altitudinal migrant. So they are in Maine all year round, but in the summer they go up elevation to breed. And so in Oxford County, they will move up higher into those mountains to breed. And then in the winter, they will come on down. And so they are a migrant, but they're not they're not flying from country to country. They're just coming down to a lower elevation. So here in Cumberland, I don't have any juncos in the summer at all, but I have tons of them out back right now. Chickadees, I don't know. I don't, they are traditionally non-migratory. Chickadees are just the coolest because they are very smart and they are sort of, I always see them as sort of the owners of the territory. They're all the other species that sort of follow them around to all the food sources. The chickadees are the ones in charge. Chickadees, like most feeder birds, they don't rely on any one feeder very much. They're smart enough to know that food sources go away. So they have about 12 different food sources on their rotation. And in the winter, they actually, starting in the fall, they start caching seeds. It's fascinating. They will take seeds and then hide them in nooks and crannies in bark and things, so that in the winter they will have these food sources, and their brains actually expand by 30%, so they can remember where they put all these dang little seeds all over the place. Humans are studying their brains to try to figure out if we can learn anything about memory. So they, chickadees are sometimes less common than juncos, which they flock more tightly. So I wouldn't be concerned, and hopefully they'll be back in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
Nick, we have a question in the chat about the Sandhill Cranes, which have been coming back in our area. Could you talk about them a little bit?
Yeah. Sandhill Cranes are the tallest bird in Maine. I think the biggest bird in Maine, a beautiful crane species. And they are increasing in Maine. And I think it's part of a natural expansion of theirs. I am actually unclear whether they were decreased and are coming back, or it's part of a natural expansion. But they are, they're kind of odd in their range. They're sort of central. For a long time, their sort of home base in Maine was the Messalonskee area, which is north of Belgrade. There's some beautiful marshland over around Messalonskee, and that's for the longest time the best place to see them. It's also, for whatever reason, the best place in Maine to see purple martins, another bird that is really declining around, another insectivorous bird. But just up the road from the Sandhill place is the best purple martin colony in Maine. Sandhill cranes are expanding slowly but surely in Maine. There's a couple of areas in sort of central Maine and the Bangor area where they're moving into, and other places. And so I don't really know.
Sorry, Nick, we have a local colony here in Freiburg Harbor in Western Maine.
Awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
There you go. They're doing great, and they are beloved whenever you see one or hear their little trumpeting noise. That was a terrible impression, I'm sorry. But good to have them.
Okay, just looking.
30 to 50 goldfinches, Donna says. We talk about goldfinches. Sure, goldfinches are wonderful. They are also non-migratory for the most part, although a lot of people wonder where their goldfinches go in the winter, and they wonder what these brown little birds are that are suddenly there all the time. Goldfinches undergo one of the most drastic sort of molts and plumage changes of any birds around here. It's a really cool story, actually, because we get questions all the time about what happened to my goldfinches. The way I like to explain it, and you probably all know this, but in the springtime is when birds need to think about having attracting mates, and to do that they look their best, right? They put on their golden feathers, they sing their songs. I think of it like us going to prom, right? Like prom's coming up, I got to put my tux on, I got to look good. But then once the breeding season is over, and those of us who've been married on the call know once you're not wearing a tux anymore, I'm out. So goldfinches in the fall, once they don't need to, impress their mate anymore, they change drastically into this brown, green, yellow plumage, which actually takes less effort to grow. The brighter feathers actually take more effort and energy to grow. They're less visible to predators, it's just sweatpants. You're wearing sweatpants, easier lifestyle. And so goldfinches are doing great. They are one of our most numerous birds. They love Niger seed, a thin little black seed that you can buy anywhere. And I could talk about them longer, but I'll see if anyone else.
Okay, let's have another look at the chat. Any more questions here? Yes, there's this isn't a question, but I hope everybody notices that the Greater Lovell Land Trust hosts Five Feathered Friends Fridays beginning May 13th. So cool. You've got to get up early, but then off we go and look for birds. So if you're interested, go to the Land Trust website and look for that. Are there any other questions?
I see a couple more. I'll do very quickly. Zoe asked if there's a resource listing native plants for landscaping. Yeah, come to Maine native plants. Something like that. Google Maine Audubon native plants and you'll find it. We have a great list there. The other one is the Wild Seed Project, which is a great native plant organization. They'll give you all the information you need. And then Steele Hayes asked how hummingbirds are doing in Maine. Doing great. We only have one species, ruby-throated hummingbird. It's doing great. They're incredible that they fly from here to Mexico. I don't even understand it. They love a couple. Let me just talk about hummingbirds for just a quick second. Believe it or not, hummingbirds, we all know that they get their nectar from, they drink nectar from flowers, of course. About 80% of their diet is actually insects, believe it or not. They'll pluck spiders off of spider webs. They will get flying insects out of the air. It again goes to show you how important insects are to everybody's diet. They're just much more nutritious than a little bit of sugar water. The other thing I will talk about is we have one species we have a ruby-throated hummingbird. Out west, they have tons of them, like 10 species of hummingbirds that we don't have. It's not fair. But occasionally, those Western hummingbirds will migrate the wrong way, incorrectly, and will show up in Maine in September, October, November, when all of our hummingbirds are gone. So we tell people, so if they show up, there's no flowers that time of year. So if you have your feeder still up during those months, that may be a place where one of these birds comes. And that's pretty awesome if that happens. So we recommend for people to keep their hummingbird feeders up as long as they stay thawed. And then call me first if you see a hummingbird after September 15th, basically.
Yes, I did last year. And then last spring, I had one arriving when there was still snow on the ground and only daffodils to try and
Holy cow.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do anything. It's amazing that they live a day, those little guys. It's crazy.
I think we've got two more questions here, or a comment and a question, and then I think we should call it a day and let Nick go and eat. So there's an observation about cardinals, cardinals being born. That sounds terrific.
Great.
And then the question is, how are grosbeaks doing?
Grosbeaks are doing good. We have a couple of grosbeaks in Maine. We have evening grosbeak, as I said. They are beautiful but eruptive. There are certain finches that live on seeds, pine grosbeaks and evening grosbeaks, and so where they move, where they are at any one time depends on how their favorite trees are producing seeds. So some years we never see evening grosbeaks in southern Maine, or never see pine grosbeaks, and that's because their food sources up north are doing great. In some years, when those food sources have a down year, they may come down to us, and so we see them. So they're doing fine. Although we may not see them ever or see them a lot in 1 year. Rose-breasted grosbeak is the other grosbeak we have. They are just the most beautiful and best birds ever. They're doing great as far as I know.
Good. Well, I think it's time for me to thank our speaker. So Nick, terrific. Thank you so much. And also thanks to Maine Audubon. And if you don't already support them, I'm sure you will after listening to this talk and all the great work that they're doing. And then I'd also just like to tell everyone about our next library speaker, also a Zoom talk, in 2 weeks' time on 24th of February. It's Kerry Arsenault, the author of Milltown, Reckoning with What Remains, which is an award-winning book about her hometown of Mexico, Maine, and the paper mill that is the main employee of Mexico and Rumford. And her topic will be Environmental and Family Legacies, a Community Conversation. So that's 7 p.m. Thursday, the 24th of February. Watch out for it. Okay, so Nick, thank you. It was a great
pleasure.
talk.
Thank you all.
I'm so glad you could join us.
Wonderful.